The distant howl echoed across whispering Pine Valley as the first light of dawn broke over the rugged mountains. Rebecca Walker paused at her cabin door, her hand tightening around the wooden frame as she listened. Most folks in Clearwater Settlement dismissed wolf cries as common mountain sounds, but Rebecca knew better. In her 3 years on the frontier, she'd learned to distinguish between an ordinary howl and the hunting call that sent shivers down her spine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This was a hunting call. Rebecca turned back to her small cabin, eyes sweeping across the meticulously organized supplies and handcrafted furniture. Everything had its place, each item carefully positioned for maximum efficiency. The rifle mounted above the stone fireplace gleamed in the early morning light, cleaned and loaded as it was every evening before she slept. Neat stacks of preserved food lined the shelves she'd built with her own hands, labeled in precise handwriting that spoke of her previous life as a schoolteacher back east. But that life was long behind her now. The faint smell of pine smoke clung to her worn buckskin jacket as she moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, packing the last of her supplies for the journey ahead. Tomorrow marked the start of winter's grip on the mountains, and the trading post at Fort Harrison was a 4-day journey through increasingly dangerous territory. If she didn't make this final trip for supplies before the heavy snows, her carefully planned winter preparations would fall short. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. Through the window, she spotted Jed Miller, the settlement's self-appointed leader, making his way toward her cabin. His stiff gait and formal attire seemed out of place against the rugged backdrop of the frontier, a reminder that he, like many others, clung to Eastern formalities despite the wilderness surrounding them. "Miss Walker," Jed called, removing his hat as Rebecca stepped onto the porch. "I hope you've reconsidered your journey to Fort Harrison. The council believes it's too dangerous, especially for a woman traveling alone." Rebecca's spine straightened imperceptibly, her face revealing nothing of the irritation that flashed through her mind. 3 years of proving herself to these people, and still they saw her as fragile, unprepared for the realities of frontier life. "The supplies won't fetch themselves, Mr. Miller," she replied, her voice carrying the calm authority that had earned her reluctant respect among the settlement's women. "And I believe we settled this matter at yesterday's meeting." Jed shifted uncomfortably, his fingers working the brim of his hat. "There's been talk of wolf packs moving down from the high country earlier than usual this year. Matthew James lost 2 sheep just last night. The council has concerns every time I make this journey," Rebecca interrupted, her blue eyes steady as steel. "Yet I've returned safely each time, with supplies that benefit everyone." She gestured toward the wagon beside her cabin, already loaded with pelts and handcrafted goods to trade. "Unless someone else is volunteering to make the trip, I'll be leaving at first light." What Rebecca didn't say was that these supply runs were more than necessity. They were her connection to a world beyond Clearwater Settlement, brief respites from the watchful eyes and whispered judgments that followed her daily movements. The settlement tolerated her independence because she was useful, but they never let her forget she was different, a woman living alone, refusing to remarry. After her husband's death, taking on tasks typically reserved for men, Jed's expression hardened slightly. "At least consider taking young Thomas with you. The boy's a good shot, and an extra pair of eyes wouldn't hurt." "Thomas is needed here to help with the winter preparations," Rebecca countered, knowing the real reason behind the offer. The settlement wasn't concerned for her safety as much as they were uncomfortable with her self-sufficiency. A woman who didn't need protection challenged their established order, After Jed finally left, Rebecca returned to her preparations, methodically checking supplies with military precision. Her husband, James, had been a captain in the army before. A frontier fever took him 3 winters ago, leaving her alone in this unforgiving land. His training had become her survival manual. Always prepare, always plan, always maintain awareness of your surroundings. As evening approached, Rebecca sat by the fire cleaning her rifle, the methodical motions calming her mind. Through the window, she watched families gathering in the center of the settlement for the evening meal, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. There had been a time when she joined them, trying to fit into the tight-knit community. Now she understood that some distances couldn't be bridged by shared meals or polite conversation. The settlement saw her as the strange widow who lived on the outskirts, who hunted her own food and repaired her own roof. They came to her when they needed medicine, skills she'd learned from an old Cherokee woman who'd passed through 2 summers ago, but kept their distance otherwise, as if independence might be catching. In truth, Rebecca preferred it this way. The isolation gave her freedom few frontier women enjoyed. Before dawn the next morning, Rebecca hitched her 2 horses to the wagon and secured the last of her supplies. The settlement was still sleeping as she climbed onto the driver's bench, her rifle within easy reach beside her. Only old Mrs. Abernathy was awake, watching silently from her porch as Rebecca guided the wagon past the last of the settlements, cabins, and onto the narrow trail that would lead her northwest to Fort Harrison. The first day's journey passed without incident. Rebecca maintained a steady pace, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line and rocky outcroppings that flanked the trail. Experience had taught her that danger on the frontier rarely announced itself with noise and commotion. The deadliest threats approached in silence. Mountain lions that stalked for miles before attacking, hostile scouts who watched from hidden positions, sudden storms that built behind mountain peaks until they unleashed their fury. She would camp that evening in a small clearing she'd used many times before, positioned with the wagon against a rock face that protected her back. As darkness fell, Rebecca built a small, controlled fire and prepared a simple meal of dried venison and hardtack. The night sounds of the wilderness enveloped her, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whispering wind through pine needles. These sounds had terrified her during her first months on the frontier. Now they were familiar companions, their presence reassuring rather than threatening. It was silence that worried her, the sudden absence of natural sounds that meant something was disturbing the forest's rhythm. Tonight, the forest spoke its normal language, and Rebecca allowed herself to relax slightly, though her rifle remained within arm's reach as she settled into her bedroll beneath the wagon. The second day brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered over the distant peaks, and the wind carried the scent of approaching snow. Rebecca pushed the horses harder, hoping to reach Thompson's Crossing by nightfall. The crossing offered better shelter, with a small trapper's cabin that had been maintained as a waypoint for travelers along this route. As the trail began to climb through steeper terrain, Rebecca noticed the first signs of trouble. Tracks in the muddy sections of the path, wolf prints larger than any she'd seen before. More concerning was their pattern, moving in the same direction she traveled rather than crossing the trail. Wolves typically avoided human scent unless driven by extreme hunger or led by an unusually aggressive alpha. By midday, the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. Rebecca had learned to trust this sensation, what James had called battlefield awareness, the subconscious mind processing subtle details the conscious mind hadn't yet recognized. She whistled softly to the horses, urging them to maintain their pace despite their obvious nervousness. The animals sensed the danger too, their ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flaring as they tested the wind. The first snowflakes began to fall as the afternoon wore on, light dustings that melted. upon contact with the ground, but promised heavier precipitation to come. Rebecca calculated distances and options with the same methodical precision she applied to all survival challenges. Thompson's Crossing lay 3 hours ahead if she maintained her current pace. Turning back to Clearwater would take nearly a full day. Continuing forward was her best option, despite the growing certainty that she was being tracked. The trail narrowed as it wound through a steep-walled ravine, forcing Rebecca to focus on guiding the horses safely over increasingly rocky terrain. The snow was falling more heavily now, reducing visibility and muffling the sounds around her. It was in this moment of focused concentration that she caught a flash of movement from the corner of her eye, a grey shadow slipping between boulders on the ridge above. Rebecca's hand moved to her rifle, the action smooth and practiced. Years ago, she would have panicked at the sight of a wolf tracking her wagon. Now she assessed the situation with calm clarity. One wolf wasn't a threat to a prepared traveler, but one visible wolf likely meant others nearby, hidden from view. The next 20 minutes passed in tense silence as Rebecca guided the wagon through the remainder of the ravine, her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain. The wolves, she'd spotted 3 different ones now, kept their distance, pacing alongside her journey without directly approaching. Their behavior was unusual, almost as if they were escorting rather than hunting her. As the trail widened again and began to descend toward Thompson's Crossing, Rebecca allowed herself to hope the wolves would lose interest once she reached the cabin. That hope faded when she crested a small rise and saw what lay ahead. A massive pine tree had fallen across the trail, blocking her path completely. The alternative route would add hours to her journey, taking her through dense forest as darkness approached. Rebecca pulled the wagon to a halt, assessing her options with critical efficiency. Moving the tree was impossible. Going around would require unhitching the horses and leading them one by one through a treacherous rock field, then somehow maneuvering the wagon through by hand, a task that would take hours and leave her vulnerable. As she considered her predicament, the horses suddenly jerked in their harnesses, eyes rolling in fear. Rebecca turned to see the cause of their distress and felt her blood run cold. A massive wolf stood on the trail behind her, its silver-grey coat distinguishing it from the others she'd spotted. Larger than any wolf had a right to be, it stood, watching her with unsettling intelligence in its amber eyes. This was no ordinary wolf. Stories circulated through frontier settlements about the legendary grey ghost, a wolf of impossible size that led a pack responsible for taking down fully grown elk and even the occasional bear. Most dismissed these as typical frontier exaggerations, but staring at the creature now blocking her retreat, Rebecca understood the stories held truth. With deliberate slowness, she raised her rifle, calculating her shot. The wolf made no move. To flee, regarding her with what almost seemed like curiosity rather than hunger. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before the wolf turned its head slightly, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. Then Rebecca heard it too. More wolves, their howls rising from the forest ahead and behind her position. The grey ghost had maneuvered her perfectly, using the fallen tree to trap her between segments of its pack. This was no opportunistic hunt, but a coordinated strategy executed with frightening intelligence. Rebecca's mind raced through her diminishing options. The horses were too terrified now to attempt backtracking or finding an alternate route. The trees nearby weren't climbable with their lowest branches far out of reach. The wagon offered some protection, but only temporarily. Darkness was approaching, along with the snowstorm, which would only embolden the predators and hamper her visibility. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt fear creeping past her carefully constructed defenses. Not panic. Panic killed faster than any predator, but the cold acknowledgement that she might have finally encountered a challenge beyond her considerable survival skills. As if sensing her realization, The grey ghost took a step forward, still maintaining a cautious distance, but clearly signaling the hunt was moving to its next phase. Rebecca steadied her rifle on the wagon seat, knowing she needed to make every shot count. Wolves typically retreated when faced with human weapons, but something told her this pack wouldn't be so easily deterred. The cracking of branches from the hillside above drew her attention. Expecting to see more wolves, Rebecca was stunned to spot a different silhouette entirely, the unmistakable form of a human figure moving with surprising speed down the steep terrain. For a moment, hope surged within her, until she realized no one from Clearwater Settlement would be this far out, and Fort Harrison traders rarely traveled this route alone. The figure emerged from the tree line, and Rebecca's surprise deepened. A man stood watching the standoff between her and the wolves, but unlike any frontier man she'd encountered before. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore clothing crafted from animal hides and furs that blended with the forest around him. His face, partially obscured by a thick beard streaked with grey, revealed weathered skin and eyes that seemed to reflect the same wild awareness as the wolves themselves. Most striking was what accompanied him. 3 enormous dogs that looked more wolf than domestic animal, their muscular bodies poised and alert as they flanked their master. They made no sound, responding to subtle hand signals the man gave. Without looking at them, Rebecca kept her rifle steady, now uncertain which presented the greater threat: the wolf pack that had trapped her, or this mountain stranger whose sudden appearance defied explanation. The man carried a crude spear in one hand, and what appeared to be a hand-forged knife at his belt, but no firearms that she could see. For several tense moments, no one moved. Not Rebecca, not the stranger, not the grey ghost, still watching. From the trail, the snow fell more heavily around them, adding an ethereal quality to the tableau. Then, without warning, the massive silver wolf turned its head toward the mountain man and made a sound unlike any wolf call Rebecca had heard. Before, almost a greeting, what happened next defied everything Rebecca thought she knew about wild animals and human boundaries. The mountain man stepped forward, making a low, guttural sound in his throat that mimicked the wolf's call. The grey ghost's ears flicked forward with interest, and incredibly, the huge predator sat back on its haunches as if waiting. The man's dogs, or whatever they were, maintained perfect discipline, neither advancing toward the wolves nor showing aggression. They watched their master with absolute focus, ready to respond to his next command. Rebecca remained frozen on the wagon seat, her rifle still raised, but her finger easing away from the trigger as confusion replaced immediate fear. She was witnessing something impossible, a man communicating with a wild wolf pack that had moments ago been preparing to attack her. The mountain man took another step forward, now looking directly at Rebecca for the first time. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, held neither threat nor welcome, only an intense assessment that seemed to look through her rather than at her. "Lower your weapon," he said, his voice rough from disuse, each word carefully formed, as if speaking was an unfamiliar activity. "They won't attack unless provoked." Rebecca kept her rifle raised, years of frontier caution overriding the strangeness of the moment. "Those wolves have been tracking me for miles. They deliberately trapped me here." The man's expression didn't change, but something like respect flickered in his gaze. "Yes, but not for the reason you think." He gestured toward the darkening sky. "Storm coming, bad one. They smelled it 2 days ago." As if to confirm his words, the wind suddenly intensified, driving the snow harder against Rebecca's face. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the storm system moved in, the early winter blizzard that people at Clearwater had been whispering about for weeks. The mountain man pointed to the fallen tree blocking the path. "That trail's no good. Now, leads to open ground. You'd be caught in the open when the real storm hits." Rebecca glanced between the man and the wolf pack, trying to make sense of the situation. The grey ghost remained seated, watching the interaction with unnerving intelligence. The other wolves she'd spotted earlier had emerged from the tree line but kept their distance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Who are you?" she finally asked, still not lowering her rifle. "Doesn't matter," he replied, "but if you want to survive the night, you need to come with me now." He pointed toward a nearly invisible trail that branched away from the main path. "My shelter's an hour from here. These wolves," he gestured toward the grey ghost, "they weren't hunting you, they were herding you." "Herding me?" Rebecca repeated incredulously. The man's weathered face revealed the barest hint of what might have been a smile, though it seemed so unfamiliar to his features that Rebecca couldn't be certain. "They do that sometimes," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "Storm's getting worse. Choose now, stay here and freeze, or follow me." As if emphasizing his warning, a powerful gust of wind rocked the wagon, and the snow began falling in earnest, already accumulating on the ground around them. The horses stamped nervously, sensing the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. Rebecca Walker had survived 3 harsh frontier winters through careful planning and self-reliance. She'd learned to trust her instincts above all else. Those instincts now presented her with impossible choices. Trust this strange mountain man with his half-wild dogs and apparent communion with wolves, or face a blizzard alone in an exposed position. The grey ghost rose to its feet and turned, trotting. A short distance along the hidden trail the man had indicated before stopping to look back at them both. The mountain stranger whistled softly, and his 3 dog wolves moved into position around the wagon. "Last chance," he said, already turning to follow the silver wolf. "Storm waits for no one." Rebecca made her decision, lowering her rifle but keeping it close as she secured the wagon as best she could. Whatever strange circumstance had brought this mountain man and his wolves to her path, survival now depended on trusting the unfolding mystery before her. The blizzard descended upon the mountains with frightening speed. Rebecca secured what supplies she could carry from the wagon, including her rifle, ammunition, and a small pack of essentials she always kept ready. The horses whinnied nervously as she unhitched them, removing their harnesses and securing only simple lead ropes. "The wagon?" she asked, raising her voice above the howling wind. The mountain man glanced at the vehicle, then at the darkening sky. "Leave it. Come back after the storm." Any other time, Rebecca would have argued. The wagon contained trade goods representing months of the settlement's collective work. But years on the frontier had taught her to recognize when survival trumped all other concerns. She secured a tarp over the most valuable items, knowing it offered little real protection against a mountain blizzard. The mountain man moved with surprising grace for someone of his size, navigating the nearly invisible trail without hesitation despite the rapidly deteriorating visibility. His 3 dog wolves ranged around them, occasionally disappearing into the swirling snow, only to reappear moments later. The grey ghost and its pack had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, melting into the forest like spirits. Rebecca led her horses through increasingly difficult terrain, the snow already ankle-deep and drifting higher in wind-swept pockets. The animals were growing more difficult to manage as the temperature plummeted and the wind drove ice crystals against exposed skin like tiny needles. "They won't make it much farther in this," she called to the mountain man, who had paused to wait for her on a ridge ahead. He studied the horses, then the storm-darkened sky, his face impassive. "Leave them." "Leave them." Rebecca's voice rose in disbelief. "These horses are going to die if we stay exposed," he interrupted, his voice matter-of-fact rather than cruel. "Storm's worse than I thought. We need to move faster." Before Rebecca could protest further, he whistled sharply. 2 of his dog wolves immediately took positions on either side of the nervous horses. Remarkably, the animals calmed somewhat in their presence. "They'll guide your horses to lower ground," the man explained, already turning back to the trail. "Natural cave system by the creek. Better shelter than they'd have with us. They'll survive there. And I'm supposed to just trust that your dogs will protect my horses?" Rebecca challenged, even as she recognized the logic of his assessment. The horses would indeed slow their progress, possibly fatally. The mountain man regarded her with those unsettling blue eyes. "Your choice. Trust them, or lead the horses yourself to a place you don't know exists, through a storm that's getting worse by the minute." Put that way, Rebecca recognized she had no real choice at all. With reluctance, she patted each horse's neck, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. When she released the lead ropes, the animals initially tensed, but the dog wolves moved with such confident purpose that the horses followed when they began trotting down a branching path. "Your companions will find us after?" Rebecca asked, watching her livelihood disappear into the swirling white. "They always do." The man shouldered his spear and gestured for her to follow. "One stays with us. Come, the shelter's still. Far." Rebecca gripped her rifle and pack, forcing herself to focus on the immediate challenge of following the mountain man's trail. The remaining dog wolf, the largest of the three, now took the lead, breaking trail through increasingly deep snow. The wind howled through the pine forest, driving the snowfall horizontally and reducing visibility to mere feet. Without her guide, Rebecca knew she would have been hopelessly lost within minutes. The physical demands of the journey prevented conversation, not that the mountain man seemed inclined toward it anyway. Rebecca found herself studying him when conditions permitted. His movements were economical, wasting no energy, his knowledge of the terrain evident in how he navigated obstacles hidden beneath the snow without hesitation. His clothing, which had at first seemed primitive, now revealed its practical design. Layers of fur and leather crafted to shed snow and break the wind, with none of the sodden weight wool would have accumulated in these conditions. After what seemed like hours of grueling progress, the dog wolf suddenly veered from the trail they'd been following, heading toward what appeared to be a solid rock face, half hidden by wind-bent pines. The mountain man followed without hesitation, and Rebecca struggled to keep pace as the snow depth increased to mid-calf. As they drew closer, Rebecca realized what she'd taken for an unbroken cliff face actually contained a narrow fissure, barely visible until they were almost upon it. The opening was just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. The dog wolf disappeared into the darkness, followed by the mountain man, who paused briefly to make sure Rebecca was still following. She hesitated at the entrance, instinctive, caution warring with the certainty that remaining outside meant death in the worsening blizzard. The howling wind made the decision for her, driving a fresh blast of ice-laden air that stung her exposed skin. Rebecca turned sideways and squeezed through the narrow opening, finding herself in near-total darkness. 3 steps forward, then, "Stop!" The mountain man's voice came from somewhere ahead. Rebecca complied, her hand instinctively reaching for the rock wall beside her for stability. The sudden absence of the storm's roar was disorienting, though she could still hear its muffled fury from the entrance behind her. A spark flashed in the darkness, then another, until a small flame caught on what appeared to be a rudimentary torch. The mountain man lifted it high, revealing they stood in a narrow passage that extended deeper into the mountainside. "Follow close," he instructed, ducking his head beneath a low section of the passageway. "Watch your step." The passage twisted several times before suddenly opening into a cavern that stole Rebecca's breath. The space was larger than her entire cabin, with a high ceiling from which small stalactites hung like frozen icicles. What amazed her most, however, was how the cave had been transformed into a living space, unlike anything she'd seen before. 1. Section contained what was clearly a sleeping area, with furs and woven blankets arranged on a raised platform of stone and wood. A fire pit occupied the center, ingeniously vented through a natural chimney in the rock ceiling. Around the perimeter, shelves had been carved directly into the stone walls, holding an assortment of tools, weapons, and containers made from wood, stone, and animal hides. Most surprising was the far corner, where a natural spring bubbled up from the ground, forming a small pool before disappearing back into the earth through a crevice. The air in the cavern was noticeably warmer than outside and drier than Rebecca would have expected from a cave. The dog wolf shook itself vigorously, spraying melting snow across the stone floor before settling near the cold fire pit. The mountain man immediately set about building a fire, his movements practiced and efficient. "You live here?" Rebecca finally asked, setting down her pack and rifle near the entrance but keeping both within easy reach. "During winters?" The man didn't look up from his task as dried moss and twigs caught the first flames. "Summer, I move higher." Rebecca remained standing, uncertain of her place in this strange domain. Frontier etiquette required established rituals between hosts and guests, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this situation. The man seemed either unaware of or unconcerned by her discomfort, focusing on building the fire to a steady blaze before standing to retrieve something from one of the stone shelves. "Sit," he finally said, gesturing toward the fire. "Warm yourself." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before approaching the fire, its warmth drawing her forward despite her caution. She positioned herself where she could keep both the cave entrance and the mountain man in view, a habit born from years of frontier survival. "Your dogs," she began, watching as the large canine stretched out comfortably by the fire. "They're not exactly dogs, are they?" The man paused in what he was doing, preparing some kind of tea in a crude but functional kettle. "No," he acknowledged, "not exactly dogs." When he offered no further explanation, Rebecca pressed, "And the wolves?" The grey one especially seemed to listen to you. "Ghost," the man said, the first time he'd named anything. "Been around these mountains longer than me, longer than anyone." He set the kettle at the edge of the fire. "We have an understanding." "An understanding?" Rebecca repeated, trying to make sense of what she'd witnessed. "I've never seen wolves behave that way. They were organized, tactical, almost like they planned the whole thing." The mountain man regarded her steadily across the fire, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "Because they did." The straightforward response left Rebecca momentarily speechless. Every instinct told her to dismiss such a claim as frontier madness, the kind that sometimes afflicted those who spent too many years alone in the wilderness. Yet she couldn't deny what she'd seen with her own eyes. "You're saying wolves deliberately herded me toward you because of the storm?" "Not toward me," he corrected. "Away from danger. The trail you were on leads through Devil's Pass. Storm-like. This you'd have been buried under 20 feet of snow when the first avalanche came down." He poured the steaming liquid into two roughly carved wooden cups. "They know the mountain's moods better than any man." He offered one of the cups to Rebecca. She hesitated before accepting it, sniffing the unfamiliar aroma, earthy with hints of pine and something sweeter she couldn't identify. "It's safe," he said, noting her caution. "Pine needle tea, good for the cold." Rebecca took a tentative sip, finding the taste unusual but not unpleasant. The warm liquid immediately began to thaw the chill that had settled in her bones during their journey. "What about my horses?" she asked, thinking of the animals being led away by the other dog wolves. "Safe by now. Lower caves stay warm year-round. Grass grows inside some of them, fed by underground springs." He drank from his own cup. "Chetan and Maska know which ones." "Your dogs have names," Rebecca observed, latching on to this small, humanizing detail. "Not dogs," he corrected again. "Wolf dogs. Born wild, chose to stay with me." Rebecca absorbed this information, along with the first names she'd heard him speak. "And do you have a name, or should I just call you Mountain Man?" Something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Some call me that." He hesitated, as if weighing whether to share something precious. Holt, Nathan Holt. The name surprised her, so ordinary for someone who seemed anything but. "I'm Rebecca Walker," she offered in return, feeling the strange formality of introductions while sitting in a cave during a blizzard, drinking pine needle tea with a man who communicated with wolves. "I know," he replied, which startled her even more. "Settlement talks, word travels." "The settlement talks about me." Rebecca wasn't sure why this surprised her, though she certainly knew she was the subject of gossip in Clearwater. Nathan Holt set his cup down. "Woman living alone, hunts her own food, trades at Fort Harrison without a man's protection." His direct gaze held no judgment. "People notice strength when it's rare." Before Rebecca could respond to this unexpected assessment, a howl echoed from the cave entrance, distinct even through the storm's fury. Nathan stood immediately, moving toward the passage with silent steps. The wolf dog by the fire lifted its head but didn't follow, clearly accustomed to this routine. Left alone by the fire, Rebecca took the opportunity to observe her surroundings more carefully. Despite its primitive nature, the cave dwelling showed signs of remarkable ingenuity. The sleeping platform was positioned where the cave's natural heat would provide maximum warmth through the night. Storage areas were organized in a system she didn't yet understand, but which clearly followed some logical pattern. Dried herbs hung from small crevices in the walls, while what appeared to be preserved meat was stored in the coolest section away from the fire. Most interesting were the small carvings she now noticed tucked into niches throughout the cave. Wooden figures of animals rendered with surprising artistry, alongside practical tools crafted with obvious skill. This was not the lair of some wild man who had abandoned civilization, but the carefully maintained home of someone who had created his own civilization according to different rules. Nathan returned several minutes later, snowmelt glistening in his beard. "Storm's getting worse. We'll be here for at least 2 days." Rebecca processed this information with growing concern. 2 days? "But the settlement won't expect you back for 4 days minimum," he finished for her. "By then, trails will be clear enough." The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling. He'd clearly calculated her journey time from Clearwater to Fort Harrison and back, knowing precisely when she would be expected to return. Indeed, Rebecca wondered what else this mountain man knew about her and the settlement. "Your horses are safe," he added, returning to his place by the fire. "Chetan and Maska have led them to the lower cave. They've found grass and water. You can tell that already." Rebecca asked skeptically. Nathan tapped his temple. "I know. The same way I know when ghosts are hunting or when bears are moving down from the high country." He stared into the fire. "The same way Ghost knew you needed a warning about the storm." "Mpath." Rebecca wrapped her hands around her cup, feeling simultaneously warmed by the fire and chilled by the implications of his words. "You're saying you can... what? Read animals' minds?" For the first time, Nathan Holt made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it seemed rusty from disuse. "No, nothing magical, just understanding. Been in these mountains 15 years. You learn to read the signs, the patterns. Animals are more honest than people. Their intentions are clear if you know how to see." "And my intentions?" Rebecca found herself asking. "What do those tell you?" His blue eyes assessed her with that same direct gaze that seemed to look through rather than at her. "That you're running from something, not just living on the frontier, hiding in it." The accuracy of his observation struck too close to secrets Rebecca had buried beneath years of careful self-sufficiency. She looked away, uncomfortable with how easily this stranger had penetrated defenses that had kept even the most persistent settlement busybodies at bay. "We all have our reasons for being here," she deflected, suddenly very interested in the contents of her cup. Nathan Holt didn't press, but his silence held an understanding that was somehow more unnerving than questions would have been. He stood and moved toward one of the storage areas, returning with dried meat and what appeared to be preserved berries. "Eat," he said, offering her a portion. "The body needs strength. Storm's just beginning." As if confirming his words, a tremendous gust of wind howled through the mountain, carrying its fury even into the protected confines of the cave passage. The sound held such primal power that Rebecca instinctively moved closer to the fire, suddenly grateful for the solid rock surrounding them. "The worst blizzard I've experienced was 2 winters ago," she said, accepting the offered food. "Snowed for 3 days straight. We lost 2 families who were caught returning from hunting." Nathan nodded grimly. "Remember it. This one's worse." Rebecca glanced toward the passage leading outside. "You think so?" "Mountain tells me so." He looked up, toward the cave's ceiling, where the faintest rumble could now be felt through the stone. "Hear that? First avalanche breaking loose from the high ridges. By morning, every pass between here and Fort Harrison will be blocked." The realization of how close she had come to being caught in such conditions sent a chill through Rebecca. That had nothing to do with the temperature. If she had continued on her planned route, or even attempted to return to Clearwater Settlement. "The wolves saved my life," she said quietly, the truth of it finally settling in her mind. "Ghost did," Nathan clarified. "Others follow him. He's lived through more winters than any wolf has right to see, knows these mountains better than any living creature." A peculiar reverence entered his voice. "Some old trappers believe he's not truly a wolf at all, but a mountain spirit that took wolf form." "And what do you believe?" Rebecca asked, curious despite herself. Nathan's expression remained unreadable. "I believe in what I see and touch. The ghost is real. His choices are real." He prodded the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "Why does he make them? That's his business." As darkness settled outside, the storm's intensity continued to build. Within the cave, however, the fire cast dancing shadows across the stone walls, creating an atmosphere of strange security amid the mountain's fury. Rebecca found her initial fear of the mountain man fading, replaced by cautious curiosity about this solitary figure who moved between worlds, not fully wild, yet clearly separate from what passed for civilization on the frontier. "You mentioned summer camps higher up," she said, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Do you never visit the settlements, Fort Harrison or Clearwater?" Nathan added another log to the fire before answering. "Twice yearly, spring and fall. Trade for what I can't make. Powder, salt, metal for tools." His words were economical, like everything else about him. "Prefer the quiet of the high country." "Most would call it loneliness rather than quiet," Rebecca observed. His blue eyes reflected the firelight when he looked up. "Most would be wrong. Mountains are never quiet if you know how to listen. And I'm rarely alone." The wolf dog lifted its head at these words, as if acknowledging its role in this man's unusual life. Rebecca realized the creature had been silently observing her since they arrived, its amber eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost human. Night fell completely outside the cave, though within its confines Rebecca had lost all sense of time. The blizzard continued its assault on the mountain, occasional gusts sending ghostly whispers through the ventilation channels in the rock. Nathan had maintained the fire at a steady burn, neither too large nor too small, demonstrating the same precise efficiency he seemed to apply to all aspects of survival. Rebecca sat cross-legged on a fur near the fire, her back against a smooth section of wall. The warmth and relative safety had allowed her muscles to relax for the first time since spotting the wolf tracks earlier that day. Now, as the immediate threat to her survival receded, her mind turned toward understanding the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her here. The settlement's stories about you don't come close to the truth, do they? She observed, breaking a companionable silence. Nathan looked up from the arrow he was carefully crafting, strong hands working the shaft with practiced precision. People see what they expect to see. And what do they see when they look at you? His hands paused momentarily. A hermit, a trapper, sometimes a ghost story frightens children. A slight shrug. Depends who's looking. And what do the wolves see? Rebecca pressed, her curiosity overcoming her customary caution. Nathan set the unfinished arrow aside, considering her question with unexpected seriousness. Not a threat, not prey. His gaze drifted to the wolf dog lying nearby. In the beginning, they saw a starving man who respected their skills and left offerings rather than competing. Later, he trailed off, as if searching for words to explain, something that existed beyond language. Later, they saw someone who moved according to the mountain's rules, not man's laws. Is that when Ghost approached you? Rebecca asked, recalling the massive silver wolf's unnatural behavior. 3 winters after I came here. Terrible season. The game had moved down to lower elevations. I found myself tracking the same deer as Ghost's pack. Nathan's eyes took on a distant quality, revisiting memories. Expected to lose the hunt? 1 man against 8 wolves? But Ghost led the pack away, leaving the kill for me. Why would a wolf give up a kill? Rebecca couldn't hide her skepticism. I didn't understand it myself then, Nathan acknowledged. Left half the meat as thanks, expecting them to take it after I was gone, returned the next day to find the meat untouched and a freshly killed rabbit left nearby. The wolf dog raised its head, as if recognizing its role in the story. Nathan reached out absently to stroke its thick fur. Started as a necessity, sharing hunting grounds, respecting territories, became something else, not friendship as people understand it. Something older. Rebecca studied the man before her, seeing beyond the wild appearance to the intelligence that animated his features. Is that when the wolf dogs joined you? Edduit came first. Nathan nodded toward the large canine by the fire, born to Ghost's pack but different, curious about the human world, started following at a distance, then closer each time. His face softened slightly. Found him injured by a bear trap set by fur traders. Nursed him back. He chose to stay. And the others? Chetan and Maska came 2 summers after, born wild but drawn to Adoete, gradually accepted me as part of their unusual pack. Nathan's expression revealed a rare glimpse of something like affection. They move between worlds, same as I do. Rebecca absorbed this extraordinary history, trying to reconcile it with her understanding of wild animals. Everything she knew about frontier survival warned against attributing human characteristics to predators, yet she'd witnessed firsthand the impossible communication between this man and the wolves. Does Ghost's pack ever come here? To the cave? Nathan shook his head. They remain wild, as they should be. We share hunting grounds and warnings about the mountain's dangers. Nothing more. He paused before adding, until today. What was different? About today, Rebecca asked, sensing something significant in his tone. Ghost has never directed his pack to intervene with humans before, never herded a traveler away from danger. Nathan's steady gaze met hers. Until you. The implications hung in the air between them, unanswered questions that neither seemed ready to address. Rebecca looked away first, uncomfortable with the weight of meaning in his words. Perhaps it was simply proximity, she suggested practically. I happened to be in the path of the storm. Nathan didn't contradict her, but something in his expression suggested he believed otherwise. He returned to his arrow-making, allowing the conversation to lapse into silence. Rebecca's thoughts drifted to her horses, hoping they had indeed found safety in the lower caves Nathan had mentioned. The animals represented not just her transportation. but a significant portion of her worldly wealth. The practical frontier part of her mind couldn't help calculating their value and the difficulty of replacing them if lost. "Tell me about Clearwater Settlement," Nathan said unexpectedly, breaking her reverie. Surprised by his interest, Rebecca gathered her thoughts. "It's small compared to most frontier settlements. 26 families at last count. It has been established for about 5 years now. Good water source, defensible position against potential raids, though we haven't had trouble with native tribes." "And you've been there 3 years," he stated rather than asked, confirming again his knowledge of her circumstances. "Yes, I arrived with my husband James. He was—" Rebecca hesitated, the familiar pain of loss momentarily catching her voice. "He was an army captain before we came west. Knew about frontier living, or thought he did. The fever took him our first winter there. Yet you stayed," Nathan observed. "Most widows return east or remarry quickly." Rebecca felt a flash of the defiance that had carried her through countless similar observations from the settlement's residents. "I'm not most widows." For the first time, Nathan's face showed something approaching a genuine smile, brief but transformative, revealing the younger man beneath the weathered exterior. Clearly, the unexpected warmth in that single word eased something in Rebecca's defensive posture. "James taught me everything he knew about survival before he passed. Hunting, tracking, basic defense. Said a woman alone on the frontier needed those skills more than a man did." She traced a pattern in the fur beneath her fingers. "The settlement. You thought I'd leave after the funeral. When I didn't, they assumed I'd accept one of the marriage proposals that came along. When I refused those two, they decided I was either mad with grief or unnatural in my desires for independence." "And were you mad with grief?" Rebecca considered the question with honesty few had offered her. "Yes, at first. But grief doesn't sustain independence for 3 years. Eventually I realized I'd found something I never had back east, the freedom to determine my own path." Nathan nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Mountains teach self-reliance, or they kill those who can't learn it." "The settlement doesn't see it that way," Rebecca said, old frustrations coloring her tone. "They tolerate me because I'm useful. I teach the children, handle basic medical needs, make these supply runs when most men won't risk the journey. But they never forget I'm breaking their rules about how a woman should behave." "Rules matter less than results on the frontier," Nathan observed. "So I've always believed, but people bring their old world with them, even here." Rebecca sighed. "Perhaps especially here, where they cling to familiar structures against the wilderness." The wolf dog Adoit suddenly raised his head, ears pivoting toward the cave entrance. Nathan went still, head slightly tilted as if listening for something beyond human hearing. Rebecca tensed and instinctively moved toward her rifle. "Chetan and Maska have returned," Nathan said after a moment, relaxing. "The horses are secured." As if summoned by his words, shadows moved in the passageway, resolving into the 2 wolf dogs she'd seen earlier. They padded silently into the main chamber, shaking off snow before approaching the fire. Rebecca marveled at how little they resembled domesticated dogs, despite their clear bond with Nathan. Everything in their movement spoke of wild grace and power barely contained. Nathan greeted them with low sounds that mimicked wolf vocalizations. The animals responded in kind, creating an eerie exchange that raised the hair on Rebecca's arms. Despite the cave's warmth, she watched in fascination as information seemed to pass between man and beasts through this strange communication. "Your horses found the cave easily," Nathan translated, turning to Rebecca. "They've settled well. Spring water and cave grass will sustain them until the storm passes." "You understood all that from those sounds they made?" Rebecca couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Nathan regarded her with that same patient expression he'd shown earlier. Not from sounds alone, from knowing these mountains, these animals, and what they would encounter on that path. He gestured toward the wolf dogs, now settling by the fire. Chetan's fur carries scent of horse sweat, but no blood or fear. Maska entered confidently, not alerting to new dangers. Their body language tells me the task was completed without incident. Put that way, the explanation seemed almost rational rather than mystical. Rebecca found herself reassessing her initial impression of Nathan Holt. His connection with the wolves wasn't some supernatural communion, but the result of years spent in careful observation and adaptation. "You've learned their language," she said with growing understanding. "And they've learned mine," he corrected. "Goes both ways. Had to, for survival." Outside, the blizzard reached new intensity, its howling penetrating even the thick cave walls. The sound recalled Rebecca to their precarious situation, stranded in a mountain cave with a stranger while nature's fury raged beyond their shelter. "How long have you lived this way?" she asked, genuinely curious now about the path that had led this clearly intelligent man to such an unconventional existence. Nathan added several logs to the fire before answering, his movements deliberate as he arranged them for optimal burning. "I came to these mountains 15 years ago, intended to trap for a season, then return east." His expression revealed nothing of whether he considered this change in plans fortunate or otherwise. "First winter taught me how little I knew. Nearly died twice before learning proper respect for the mountains." "What brought you west originally?" Rebecca pressed, sensing there was more to his story. Nathan's face closed slightly, reminding her that despite their unusual circumstances, they remained strangers with boundaries. "War," he said simply, in a tone that discouraged further questions on that topic. Rebecca recognized the shuttered expression. She'd seen it in James and other veterans who carried memories they preferred not to revisit. She respected Nathan's clear desire to avoid that conversation, changing direction instead. "How did you find this cave? It seems perfectly suited to habitation, yet nearly invisible from outside." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly at the shift in topic. "Followed a wounded elk 3 days through an early winter storm. Animals led me here, perhaps seeking shelter itself." Nathan glanced around the cavern, a hint of pride evident in his assessment. "Took 2 years to make it truly livable. Carved ventilation channels for fire smoke, built sleeping platforms above the cold floor, and found ways to store food safe from scavengers." Rebecca studied the cave with new appreciation for the work that had gone into transforming it. "It's remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. Many caves in these mountains," Nathan responded with characteristic understatement. "Some are better than others. This one has natural heat from hot springs beneath, good ventilation, multiple exits." "Multiple exits?" Rebecca's survival instincts immediately noted this important detail. Nathan nodded toward the back of the cave, where the shadows were deepest. 3 separate passages. One leads down to the horses, another climbs to a lookout point. Third, it connects to a larger cave system that can be navigated in an emergency. The strategic advantages of such a setup weren't lost on Rebecca. This wasn't merely a shelter, but a defensible position with escape routes. The dwelling of someone who understood both the wilderness and human threats. "You've had trouble with others before," she observed. "Trappers or traders?" Something hard flickered in Nathan's eyes. "Occasionally. Some men see the wilderness as something to conquer rather than respect. They take it without understanding the limits. And when they cross into your territory, I encourage them to reconsider their path." His tone remained neutral, but Rebecca sensed dangerous depths beneath the measured response. "Most do, once they understand the mountain doesn't favor them." The euphemism wasn't lost on her. Whatever Nathan Holt had been before coming to these mountains, he was clearly capable of defending his domain when necessary. Yet he had chosen to help rather than harm her when their paths crossed, a distinction that spoke to character rather than capability. As the night deepened, Rebecca felt the exhaustion of the day's events settling into her bones. The warmth of the fire and relative safety of their shelter made her eyelids grow heavy despite her usual vigilance in unfamiliar surroundings. Nathan noticed her struggle to remain alert. Without comment, he moved to the sleeping platform and arranged several furs into a comfortable pallet, then gestured toward it. "Rest. I'll maintain the fire." Rebecca hesitated, ingrained caution warring with practical necessity. "And you? Sleep a little during storms," he replied, returning to his place by the fire. "Mountains speak loudly at such times. Best to listen." Under normal circumstances, Rebecca would never have considered sleeping in the presence of a stranger, particularly one as enigmatic as Nathan Holt. But these circumstances were far from normal, and her instincts, which had kept her alive for 3 years on the frontier, told her she faced no immediate threat from this unusual man. "Thank you," she said simply, moving to the sleeping platform. She positioned herself where she could keep the main cavern in view, her rifle within arm's reach, a compromise between trust and prudence. The furs were surprisingly soft and free from the usual wilderness odors, suggesting regular care and cleaning. Rebecca settled into their warmth, watching through half-closed eyes as Nathan continued his arrow-making by the fire, his weathered hands working with gentle precision that contradicted his otherwise imposing presence. The wolf dogs arranged themselves around the cavern. Adoit remained near Nathan, while Chetan and Maska positioned themselves near the cave entrance, alert to any changes in their environment. The scene struck Rebecca as primarily familiar, as if she were witnessing a tableau from humanity's distant past, when the first partnerships between humans and wolves were forged in similar caves against similar winter storms. As sleep began to claim her, Rebecca's last conscious thought was that perhaps she understood Nathan Holt better than she had first assumed. They were not so different. Two souls who had found in the wilderness a freedom denied them in civilization, each adapting to its harsh demands in their own way. The how of their adaptations might differ, but the why sang with similar resonance. The storm continued its assault on the mountain through the night, but within the cave's protective embrace, Rebecca slept more deeply than she had in years, guarded by a man who spoke with wolves and the wild sentinels who had chosen to share his solitary path. She dreamed of running through moonlit forests, not in fear but in exhilaration, her feet barely touching the ground as she moved with the fluid grace of a wolf. Beside her ran shadowy companions, neither fully human nor animal, but something in between, creatures of boundary spaces who understood both worlds without fully belonging to either. And ahead, a massive silver wolf led the way, its coat gleaming like metal in the dreamlight, leading her towards something she couldn't yet see, but instinctively understood was important. The dream shifted, and suddenly she stood at the edge of a precipice, looking down at Clearwater Settlement far below. The buildings seemed toy-like from this height, the people moving between them like ants, following invisible trails. She felt a presence beside her, not threatening but watchful, patient. When she turned, the mountain man stood there, his blue eyes reflecting the endless sky. "They can't see what we see from up here," Dream Nathan said, his voice carrying none of the roughness it held in waking life. "What do we see?" Dream Rebecca asked. "The pattern," he replied, gesturing toward horizons that seemed to extend forever. "In all directions, how everything connects, how small their walls are against the truth of the mountains." She woke with a start, the dream dissolving like morning mist, leaving behind only a lingering sense of significance she couldn't quite capture. The cave was quieter now, the storm's fury somewhat diminished, though still present. The fire burned, low but steady, casting subtle light across the stone walls. Nathan sat in the same position, his back against the wall, eyes closed but posture suggesting watchfulness rather than sleep. The wolf dogs had rearranged themselves, with only Maska still guarding the entrance, while the others dozed near the fire's warmth. As if sensing her wakeful state, Nathan opened his eyes, meeting her gaze across the dimly lit cavern. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of shared space and circumstances that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then he nodded once, a simple recognition of her presence, before rising to tend the fire as a new day began within their stone shelter while the blizzard continued its siege beyond. Morning arrived without the customary lightening of the cave. The storm continued unabated, blanketing the mountains in layers of snow that would reshape trails and alter familiar landmarks. Rebecca stirred fully awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, until memory returned in a rush. The wolves, the mountain man, the blizzard that had driven them to this stone sanctuary. Nathan had already been active for some time, judging by the fresh wood on the fire and the scent of something cooking in a crude stone pot. The wolf dogs had repositioned themselves around the cavern, with Adouet now absent, presumably sent to patrol outside despite the weather. Storms changing, Nathan observed without preamble, as Rebecca rose and folded the furs she'd slept upon. Turning to ice now, more dangerous. Rebecca moved closer to the fire, accepting a wooden cup of what appeared to be some kind of broth. The liquid was rich and gamey, with unfamiliar herbs that tingled pleasantly on her tongue. "How can you tell the storm is changing from here?" she asked after several warming sips. "Sound shifts," he replied, cocking his head slightly as if demonstrating the listening posture. "Winds higher pitched means colder air moving in from the northwest. Creates ice crust over fresh snow, treacherous for travel, deadly for most. Games." Rebecca considered this assessment against her own frontier weather knowledge. James had taught her the basic patterns, but Nathan's understanding went deeper, rooted in years of direct observation rather than second-hand learning. "What does it mean for our situation?" she asked practically. "Means we wait longer." Nathan stirred the pot over the fire. "Ice storms can last another day after snow stops. Moving too soon means broken legs for horses or worse." Rebecca frowned, calculating the extended absence against the settlement's expectations. "Clearwater will worry if I'm gone too long. They might send a search party." Nathan's expression remained impassive, but something like concern flickered in his eyes. Search parties in these conditions would find only trouble. No tracking possible under fresh snow, and ice makes every slope a death trap. "I know that," Rebecca acknowledged. "But the settlement council doesn't understand mountain weather the way—" She stopped herself before saying, "We do," startled by how quickly she'd mentally grouped herself with this man rather than her community. If Nathan noticed her hesitation, he gave no sign. "When the weather clears, I'll help you retrieve your wagon and guide you back to the main trail. Until then, waiting is our only option." The simple logic was unarguable, yet Rebecca felt a restlessness that had nothing to do with the confined space. Being in someone else's territory, dependent on their knowledge and resources, ran counter to the fierce self-reliance she'd cultivated since James's death. Seeking to regain some sense of agency, she asked, "How can I help while we wait? I'm not accustomed to sitting idle." Nathan considered her question with the same seriousness he seemed to apply to all matters. Supplies need organizing. Winter stores took damage when a stream flooded part of the storage cave last month. Rebecca welcomed the practical task following Nathan to a narrow side passage that opened into a smaller cavern lined with stone shelves. Here, Nathan's provisions were stored in a variety of containers, some crafted from wood, others from treated animal hides or woven plant fibers. Many showed signs of water damage, their contents in need of drying or repackaging. Working together, they fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Nathan's organizational system was different from Rebecca's, but equally logical, grouping items by season of use rather than type, with the most essential supplies positioned for quickest access. She found herself admiring the efficiency of his arrangements, recognizing the years of experience and refinement they represented. "You mentioned a war," Rebecca said carefully as they worked, testing whether daylight had made Nathan more willing to speak of his past. Was it the conflict with Mexico? Nathan continued sorting dried berries without looking up. Before that, Creek War, then Seminole campaigns. His voice remained neutral, reciting facts rather than memories. Served under Jackson, then Scott. Rebecca paused in her task, mental calculations running swiftly. Those conflicts had ended nearly 20 years ago, making Nathan older than she'd initially estimated. His weathered appearance wasn't just from exposure to the elements, but from the accumulation of more years and experiences than she'd assumed. "You were very young," she observed, careful to keep her tone conversational rather than probing. 15 when I joined, lied about my age. A ghost of something dark crossed his features. Old enough to kill, they decided. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Rebecca recognized the voice of someone who had seen too much. Death too early. A burden she'd witnessed in James during his darker moments when memories of his own military service surfaced. "James, my husband, served later," she offered, creating a bridge of shared experience between them. Said the hardest part wasn't the fighting, but returning to a world that expected you to forget what you'd seen and done. Nathan's hands stilled briefly, a small but significant tell from a man whose movements were otherwise consistently deliberate. "Your husband understood. Is that why you stayed in the mountains? Because returning wasn't possible?" For a long moment, Rebecca thought she'd pushed too far. Nathan continued his work, face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "Tried returning. Worked as a surveyor, then guide for western-bound settlers. I found I couldn't sleep in towns anymore. Too many people. Too much noise." He secured a package of dried meat before continuing. "Dreams were difficult. Out here, the dreams changed. It became something I could bear." The admission, simple as it was, represented a significant sharing from someone who clearly valued his privacy. Rebecca received it with the respect it deserved, offering neither platitudes nor further questions. They continued working in companionable silence until a sudden commotion at the cave entrance drew their attention. Idoit had returned, shaking ice crystals from his thick fur. More surprising was what accompanied him, the massive form of Ghost, the silver wolf, standing just inside the passage with snow melting from his coat. Nathan immediately moved toward the main cavern, his posture alert but not alarmed. Rebecca followed more cautiously, struck again by the sheer size of the wolf. Standing in the confined space of the cave, Ghost seemed even larger than he had on the trail, his shoulder reaching nearly to her waist, his powerful body radiating wild strength. The wolf's amber eyes tracked their movement, showing none of the wariness wild animals typically displayed in close proximity to humans. Instead, he carried himself with the confidence of one visiting familiar territory, though he maintained a respectful distance from the fire. Nathan made the same low vocalizations Rebecca had heard him use with the wolf dogs. Ghost responded with a chuffing sound, then turned his massive head toward the cave entrance, ears pricked forward. "More storms coming," Nathan translated, his expression grave. "Ghost never enters the cave unless the weather turns truly dangerous. He's warning us." Rebecca couldn't hide her amazement. "Warning and seeking shelter himself," Nathan corrected. "When the ghost comes inside, the mountains are speaking with their harshest voice." As if confirming this assessment, a new sound penetrated the cave walls, the deep, resonant rumble of distant avalanches breaking loose from the higher elevations. Rebecca felt the vibration through the stone floor, a primal reminder of nature's overwhelming power. "The trail I was following," she began, comprehension dawning, "would be buried now," Nathan finished. 20 feet deep in some places, no surviving that. The reality of how close she had come to death sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the temperature. Without Ghost's intervention and Nathan's guidance, she would have vanished beneath tons of snow and ice, her fate unknown to the settlement until spring thaw revealed what remained. Ghost padded further into the cavern, circling once before settling near the passage that led to the deeper cave system. The other wolf dogs maintained a respectful distance, acknowledging his dominant presence without challenge. "How long has he been coming here?" Rebecca asked, unable to take her eyes off the magnificent animal. 10 years, only during the worst storms." Nathan added wood to the fire. "The first time was a surprise for us both. Found him at the entrance, half frozen after a 3-day ice storm. Let him warm himself. Expect him to leave when the weather clears." "But he returned," Nathan nodded. "Next great storm he appeared again. Established a pattern. He shelters here when necessary. I respect his presence. He respects mine. The arrangement works. And the settlement has no idea the legendary Grey Ghost visits your cave regularly," Rebecca observed with a touch of irony. "They'd never believe it. People believe what fits their understanding," Nathan replied. "Easier to imagine me as a hermit who's lost his mind than as someone who's found different truths." The philosophical bent of his response surprised Rebecca, revealing depths to this mountain man that contradicted the simple existence he appeared to lead. Once again she found herself reassessing her initial impressions, recognizing that Nathan Holt's isolation was a choice made from wisdom rather than inability to function in society. As the day progressed, the storm intensified, as Nathan had predicted. Ice crystals formed in the cave entrance, creating delicate patterns that caught the firelight. The distant rumbling of avalanches became more frequent, confirming the wisdom of having sought shelter when they did. Rebecca found herself studying Ghost when she thought the wolf wasn't watching. Everything about the animal defied her understanding of wild predators. He maintained a clear consciousness of the space he occupied, never approaching the fire or the sleeping areas, yet showing none of the restless pacing captive animals exhibited. His presence carried a palpable intelligence, observing, assessing, communicating in ways that transcended her frontier education. "The settlement speaks of a silver wolf that's lived in these mountains for generations," she said, recalling fireside tales she'd previously dismissed as exaggeration. "They claim it can't be killed by bullet or trap, that it understands human speech and takes revenge on hunters who violate the mountain's unwritten rules." Nathan glanced at Ghost, who appeared to be resting with eyes half closed. "Legends grow from seeds of truth. Ghost has survived situations that would kill ordinary wolves. Hunters who've tried to take him often meet with unfortunate accidents." "Accidents?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Falls from narrow trails, equipment failures, sudden storms that catch them unprepared." Nathan's expression remained neutral. "The mountain provides many ways to teach respect. And you've never been tempted. A pelt like that would bring considerable trade value." Something hard flashed in Nathan's eyes. "Some things have value beyond trade goods. Ghost is one of them." Rebecca nodded, understanding she'd touched on something fundamental to Nathan's worldview. "I meant no offense. I was testing a theory." "What theory?" "That whatever brought you to this mountain, whatever keeps you here apart from settlements and towns, has to do with finding value in things others would exploit without thought." Nathan regarded her silently for a long moment, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Your husband taught you tracking and hunting. What else did he teach you?" "To observe people the way you observe games," Rebecca replied honestly. James said understanding human motivation was as important for survival as any physical skill. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. He was right. They were interrupted by a sudden alertness in Ghost, the great wolf rising to his feet with attention focused on the cave entrance. Nathan straightened, head tilted in his characteristic listening posture. Rebecca instinctively reached for her rifle, detecting the change in atmosphere, though unable to identify its cause. "Someone's coming," Nathan said, voice barely above a whisper. "In this storm? That's impossible," Rebecca protested. "Not impossible. Desperate." He moved silently toward the narrow entrance passage, Ghost and Adoite flanking him, while the other wolf dogs positioned themselves protectively near Rebecca. Heart-pounding, Rebecca checked her rifle, ensuring it was loaded and ready. Few legitimate travelers would be on the mountain in such conditions, which left concerning possibilities: desperate trappers, outlaws seeking shelter, or perhaps a search party from Clearwater that had foolishly set out despite the weather. Nathan disappeared into the passage, moving with the noiseless grace she'd noted during their journey to the cave. Ghost followed, a silver shadow melting into darkness, while Adoite remained at the passage entrance, alertly guarding against potential threat. The minutes stretched interminably as Rebecca waited, straining to hear any sound beyond the wolf dog's steady breathing and the crackle of the fire. When Nathan finally returned, his expression was grim, snowmelt glistening in his beard. "Two men," he reported, keeping his voice low. "Trappers from their gear, storm-caught and following the cliff face seeking shelter." "Are they close to finding the entrance?" Rebecca asked, mentally calculating how two more people would strain the cave's resources if they had to be accommodated. "Close enough to be dangerous. The cave entrance is concealed, but desperate men see what others miss." The implicit question hung between them. What to do about these unexpected visitors? Rebecca recognized the dilemma. Frontier ethics demanded offering shelter to those in danger from the elements, yet strangers represented an unknown threat, particularly to a man who valued his privacy and a woman traveling alone. "We could guide them to one of the other caves." "You mentioned," Rebecca suggested, "provide them shelter without revealing this place." Nathan considered this, his calculation evident in his gaze. "Possible, risky in current conditions. Ice makes even short journeys treacherous." "What does your instinct tell you about them?" "They're afraid," he replied without hesitation. "One is injured, limping badly, not well equipped for winter mountains. Made many mistakes before the storm caught them." Rebecca weighed this assessment against her own frontier experience. "Novices, then? Not hardened outlaw types?" "Not likely. But fear makes men unpredictable." Nathan glanced toward Ghost, who had returned to the main cavern but remained alertly focused on the passage. "Ghost distrusts them." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Rebecca had already seen enough to respect the wolf's judgment, having benefited from it herself. "What do you suggest?" she asked, deferring to Nathan's greater knowledge of the territory. Nathan's expression remained unreadable as he considered. "Their options. I'll approach them openly. Offer to guide them to the lower cave where your horses are sheltered. Better for everyone if they don't know about this place." "And if they refuse your help or prove dangerous?" Something cold entered Nathan's eyes, a reminder that beneath his measured demeanor lay a man entirely capable of defending his territory. "Then Ghost and I will ensure they find another path." The implicit threat wasn't lost on Rebecca, but neither did it disturb her. Frontier justice operated by necessity on different principles than Eastern law. Survival sometimes required hard choices. "I'll come with you," she decided, already reaching for her coat. "They'll be less suspicious of a woman's presence. Might make them more willing to accept your guidance rather than demanding to know what you're protecting." Nathan studied her with a new appreciation. Clever, but dangerous if they're truly desperate. Life on the frontier is dangerous, Rebecca replied simply. I'd rather face it prepared than hide from it. After a moment's consideration, Nathan nodded his acceptance of her logic. We approached each other then, but you follow my lead, stay behind me, and if I signal you to retreat, I'll retreat, Rebecca promised, though they both recognized the steel beneath her agreeable tone. This was a woman who had survived 3 years alone on the frontier. She would make her own assessments of danger as they proceeded. Nathan geared himself for the weather outside, adding layers of fur and leather that would protect against the ice storm's bitter cold. Rebecca did the same with her own clothing, grateful for the practical design of her frontier garments that prioritized function over the restrictive fashions Eastern women endured. As they prepared to venture outside, Ghost approached Rebecca, his massive body blocking her path momentarily. The silver wolf regarded her with those unsettling amber eyes, intelligence evident in his gaze. Then, to her astonishment, he briefly lowered his head, not in submission, but in something that seemed remarkably like acknowledgement before. Moving aside, Nathan had witnessed the exchange, his expression revealing a rare surprise. He's never done that before, he said quietly. Not with any human, but me. What does it mean? Rebecca asked, heart racing from the encounter. Nathan's gaze held an intensity that matched the wolf's. It means the mountain has made its choice about you, Rebecca Walker. And now we must deal with what waits outside. The world outside the cave had transformed into a crystalline nightmare. Every surface gleamed with ice, beautiful and deadly in the fading afternoon light. Trees bent under the weight of frozen precipitation, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. The ground itself had become treacherous, a layer of ice covering the deep snow beneath, creating surfaces that could break underfoot without warning. Nathan moved with practiced caution, each step tested before committing his weight. Rebecca followed his example, grateful for the sturdy boots James had insisted she have custom-made before their journey west. The wolf dog Adouette accompanied them, moving with surprising agility across the ice-covered terrain, while Ghost had remained behind guarding the cave with Chetan and Maska. They traveled in silence, sound carrying dangerously far in the frozen landscape. Nathan led them along the cliff face through a roundabout path that approached the trappers from above rather than directly. The strategy was clear: observe before being observed, assess before engaging. When they finally spotted the men, Rebecca understood Nathan's caution. The 2 trappers huddled miserably beneath an inadequate shelter of pine boughs, their fire struggling against the elements. One man was indeed injured, his leg bound with a crude bandage already soaked through with blood. The other paced restlessly, periodically stopping to examine the cliff face with desperate attention. Their equipment spoke volumes about their inexperience, inadequate for winter mountains, with supplies clearly running low. These were not seasoned mountain men, but opportunists who had ventured beyond their knowledge, lured by tales of plentiful beaver and wolf pelts in the high country. Eastern boys playing frontier life, Rebecca whispered, the assessment harsh, but accurate. Nathan nodded once, his gaze evaluating entry points and potential threats. The injured man carried a rifle across his lap, while the pacing trapper had a pistol at his belt, both weapons rendered questionable by the moisture and ice they'd been exposed to, but still dangerous if functional. I'll approach openly, Nathan decided, his voice barely audible above the wind. You remain hidden until I signal. If anything happens, return to the cave immediately. Rebecca wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in his plan. Her presence might complicate the initial encounter, especially if the men reacted poorly to Nathan's appearance. Years in the wilderness had rendered him a formidable sight, his bearded face and fur-clad body more resembling a bear than a man to unprepared eyes. Be careful, she said simply, positioning herself behind a large boulder that offered both concealment and a clear view of the scene below. Nathan made his way down the slope with deliberate noise, allowing the trappers to hear his approach before seeing him. It was a calculated move. Surprising, desperate men often triggered violent responses, while giving them time to register an approaching presence could diffuse initial panic. The strategy proved wise. The pacing trapper spun toward the sound, hand dropping to his pistol, but not drawing it as Nathan emerged from the trees. The injured man struggled to raise his rifle, but lacked the strength to aim it properly. "Hold your fire!" Nathan called, his voice carrying the authority of someone comfortable in the wilderness. "I mean no harm." Rebecca watched the scene unfold, noting how Nathan had moderated his appearance, keeping his hands visible, his posture non-threatening despite his size. He'd even adjusted his speech, using clearer diction than the economical communication he practiced with her. "Who the hell are you?" the standing trapper demanded, his accent marking him as from somewhere near. "Boston. Where'd you come from in this godforsaken storm?" "Name's Holt," Nathan replied, stopping at a respectful distance. "I live in these mountains. Spotted your fire and came to offer help." The injured man lowered his rifle, relief evident in his face despite the pain that tightened his features. "Thank God. We've been stranded for 2 days now. Jimmy's leg got caught in our own trap when the storm hit and we were trying to collect them." A rookie mistake that confirmed Rebecca's assessment of their inexperience. No seasoned trapper would attempt to gather traps with a storm approaching, nor would they set them where they might stumble into their own devices. "That leg needs proper tending," Nathan observed, glancing at the blood-soaked bandage. "I can guide you to shelter, help with the wound." The standing trapper, presumably Jimmy, maintained his suspicious posture. "Why would a mountain hermit help strangers? What's your angle?" Nathan's expression revealed nothing of the calculation Rebecca knew must be running through his mind. No angle. Mountain code, shelter offered to those who need it during storms. You'd do the same. It was a clever appeal, Rebecca realized. By assuming the best of the trappers, Nathan created a social obligation they would find difficult to reject without losing face. The injured man understood this immediately. "Damn right we would," he said, shooting his companion a warning look. "I'm Peter Davis. This suspicious fool is Jimmy Richardson. We're grateful for any help you can provide, Mr. Holt." Nathan nodded once, then gestured toward the ridge. "Got a cave about half-mile from here. Difficult terrain with that leg, but better than freezing to death in the open." Jimmy remained wary, his hand never straying far from his pistol. "You alone up here? Seems strange, one man in the winter mountains." The question carried implicit threat, assessing whether Nathan represented easy prey once they reached shelter. Rebecca tensed behind her boulder, hand moving to her own weapon. "Not alone," Nathan replied evenly. "Have companions who will help carry your friend if needed." The deliberate ambiguity was masterful, Rebecca thought. The trappers would assume human companions, while Nathan had merely stated a fact. His wolf dogs were indeed capable of helping transport an injured man if necessary. Jimmy opened his mouth to ask another question when a distant rumble interrupted him. The distinctive sound of another avalanche breaking loose from the high country. All three men instinctively looked toward the sound, a reminder of the mountain's deadly power. "Storm's building again," Nathan said, urgency entering his voice. "Need to move now if you're coming. Caves secure against avalanches. This spot isn't." The practical threat overcame Jimmy's suspicion. Together, they helped Peter to his feet, the injured man grimacing as weight settled on his damaged leg. Nathan whistled softly, and a duet emerged from the tree line, causing both trappers to recoil in alarm. "What the hell is that?" Jimmy demanded, and now fully on his pistol. "One of my companions," Nathan replied calmly. "He won't harm you unless you threaten us." Rebecca recognized her cue. and emerged from her hiding place, making her approach visible and unthreatening. The shock on the trappers' faces at seeing a woman would have been comical under different circumstances. "This is Rebecca," Nathan introduced her without elaboration. "She can help with your friend's leg once we reach shelter." The presence of a woman transformed the trapper's demeanor instantly. Jimmy's hand dropped from his weapon while Peter attempted to straighten despite his pain. The frontier might be lawless in many respects, but certain social conventions remained powerful, particularly among men recently from civilization. "Ma'am," Peter managed, attempting a courteous nod despite his condition. "Didn't expect to find a lady in these mountains." Rebecca offered a practical smile, maintaining the role Nathan had implicitly assigned her. "Nor I find trappers this high in winter. Let's get you somewhere warm before discussing the surprise further." With the immediate tension diffused, they began the difficult journey toward the lower caves Nathan had mentioned. He had decided, Rebecca realized, not to bring these strangers to his main dwelling, a precaution she fully supported. Instead, they were heading toward the cavern where her horses had been sheltered, a separate system that would provide necessary protection without revealing Nathan's true home. The journey proved arduous. Peter could barely walk, despite leaning heavily on Jimmy, and the ice-covered terrain threatened treacherous falls with each step. Eventually, Nathan fashioned a crude stretcher from pine branches and his outer fur coat, allowing them to carry Peter more effectively between them. By the time they reached the lower cave entrance, darkness had nearly fallen, and the temperature had dropped precipitously. The cave mouth was larger than Nathan's hidden dwelling, easily visible in the cliff face, and clearly used occasionally by other travelers. Judging by the old fire rings near the entrance, Rebecca's horses nickered in recognition as they entered, confirming this was indeed where the wolf dogs had led them. The animals looked remarkably comfortable, with access to natural feed growing around the underground spring Nathan had mentioned, and protection from the elements. "You weren't exaggerating about the cave," Jimmy observed, helping lower Peter onto a relatively flat section of ground near where they would build a fire. "How'd you find this place?" "Mountains show their secrets to those who pay attention," Nathan replied, already gathering materials for a fire from a small stock of wood, stored deeper in the cavern, evidence of his foresight in maintaining multiple shelter options. Rebecca immediately turned her attention to Peter's injured leg, her experience with frontier medicine making her the most qualified to assess the damage. Carefully unwrapping the blood-soaked bandage, she revealed a deep puncture wound, consistent with a trap injury, already showing concerning signs of infection. "How long ago did this happen?" she asked, keeping her voice professional rather than accusatory. 2 days, Peter admitted, wincing as she examined the wound. "Maybe 3. Lost. Track in the storm. The trap was yours?" she confirmed, gathering clean cloth from her pack to create a fresh bandage. Peter nodded miserably. "Set it for the wolf, but forgot its exact location when the snow started covering everything. Stepped right into it like a greenhorn." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Nathan, both recognizing the irony. A wolf trap injuring its setter, while actual wolves had been instrumental in saving other humans from the storm. Nathan's expression revealed nothing to the trappers, but Rebecca caught the subtle tightening around his eyes that she was learning to read as concern. "Infections setting in," she told Peter honestly. "Needs cleaning, proper medicine, and rest. Even then, you're at risk of losing the leg if the infection spreads." Jimmy paled at her assessment. "We're 5 days from the nearest settlement if the weather was perfect." "Fort Harrison is closer," Rebecca corrected. 3 days in good conditions, but no one's traveling until this storm breaks and the snow settles." "So we're trapped here?" Jimmy asked, the edge of panic entering his voice. "You're sheltered here," Nathan corrected firmly. Difference between life and death in winter mountains. While Rebecca continued tending Peter's wound, Nathan built the fire with practiced efficiency, creating a substantial blaze that soon filled the cave with welcome warmth. Edwet positioned himself near the entrance, maintaining his watchful guard, while remaining far enough from the strangers to avoid causing them further anxiety. As the warmth permeated the cave, some of the tension eased from the group. Jimmy began unpacking their meager supplies, while Rebecca cleaned Peter's wound as thoroughly as possible with the materials available. Nathan disappeared briefly, returning with a small pouch of dried herbs from his own supplies. "Boil these in water," he instructed Rebecca quietly. "Make a poultice for the wound, helps fight infection." Rebecca recognized some of the herbs from her own medicinal knowledge, though others were unfamiliar. Cherokee medicine, she guessed, recalling her earlier mention of learning from a Cherokee woman who had passed through Clearwater. Nathan nodded once. "Mixed with other knowledge. I learned from many sources over the years." The simple statement hinted at a broader history than he'd previously revealed, suggesting Nathan Holt had interacted with various indigenous peoples and perhaps other mountain men during his 15 years in the wilderness, accumulating knowledge rather than isolating himself completely from human contact. As they worked together preparing the medicinal poultice, Rebecca noticed Jimmy watching them with calculated interest, his earlier suspicion transforming into something more speculative. When Nathan moved to check on the horses, Jimmy approached Rebecca under the pretense of helping tend his friend. "Strange to find a woman out here with a man like that," he commented, keeping his voice low. "Is he your husband?" "No," Rebecca replied curtly, focusing on applying the poultice to Peter's wound. "Mr. Holt helped me when the storm caught me traveling to Fort Harrison, same as he's helping you now." Jimmy's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her explanation. Man living alone in the mountains for years suddenly has a woman in his cave. Seems convenient. "Your implications are both incorrect and ungrateful," Rebecca responded, her tone cooling considerably. "Particularly given that we're saving your lives while risking our own supplies during winter scarcity." The rebuke hit its mark, Jimmy flushing with embarrassment. "Meant no offense, ma'am, just trying to understand the situation." "The situation is simple," Rebecca said firmly. "We're all sheltering from a deadly storm. Once it passes and your friend can travel, we'll all continue our separate journeys." Despite her confident statement, Rebecca felt a strange reluctance at the thought of returning to Clearwater Settlement after their ordeal passed. The enforced intimacy of the cave had created an unusual bond between herself and Nathan Holt, a mutual respect between equals that she rarely experienced in the settlement, where her independence was viewed with suspicion rather than appreciation. After ensuring Peter was resting as comfortably as possible, his wound properly dressed with the herbal poultice, Rebecca joined Nathan, where he stood examining her horses near the back of the cave. "They're in good condition," he observed quietly. "The wolf dogs chose well. This cave has everything they need." "Thank you for ensuring their safety," Rebecca replied with genuine gratitude. "They represent most of what I own in this world." Nathan nodded, understanding the practical value of good horses on the frontier without needing further explanation. "Your medical skills are considerable," he noted, changing the subject. "The trapper might keep his leg because of your care." "Combined with your medicine," Rebecca acknowledged. "My knowledge comes mostly from books and James's army experience. Yours seems more directly acquired." "Survival teaches efficiently," Nathan replied with characteristic understatement. His gaze moved toward the cave entrance, where falling darkness had rendered the outside world invisible. "Storm's intensity is shifting again. Listen." Rebecca stilled, focusing her attention as Nathan had taught her. After a moment, she detected what he'd already noticed. The wind's pitch had changed, carrying more moisture and less ice in its sound. "Returning to snow from ice," she observed. "Is that good or bad?" "Means the worst has passed for now. The temperature is rising slightly." Nathan's expression remained guarded. "But more snow creates new dangers. Deep drifts, hidden crevasses, delayed avalanches when weight builds. How long before we can travel safely?" Nathan considered the question with his usual thoroughness. 2 days minimum. Your horses need proper trails, not deep snow. The injured man needs more recovery time." Rebecca glanced back at the trappers, lowering her voice further. "Do you trust them?" "Trust is earned," Nathan replied simply. "They're no immediate threat while dependent on our help. After that," he shrugged slightly, "men reveal their true nature when desperate or when they believe they hold power." "You suspect they might return for your cave once they're well?" Rebecca had seen enough of frontier greed to recognize the possibility. Some men view the mountain as property to be claimed, rather than power to be respected. Nathan's blue eyes held a hardness born from experience. "If they make that mistake, the mountain will teach them otherwise." The quiet certainty in his voice wasn't a threat, but a statement of natural law, as he understood it. Rebecca found herself nodding in agreement, sharing his perspective in a way that would have seemed foreign to her just days before. "The settlement will be growing concerned," she said, returning to more immediate matters. "My absence will be noted after tomorrow." "Nothing to be done about that now," Nathan replied practically. "When weather permits, I'll help retrieve your wagon and guide you to the main trail. If these trappers can travel, they can accompany you toward Fort Harrison." The plan was sensible, yet Rebecca felt an unexpected reluctance at the thought of returning to Clearwater's confining expectations. The mountain had shown her something different, a kind of freedom she hadn't fully understood was possible, even in her independent life at the settlement's edge. Their quiet conversation was interrupted by a soft sound from the cave entrance. Not Adote's movement, but something else. Both turned simultaneously to find Ghost standing just inside the opening, his silver coat almost luminous in the firelight. The massive wolf surveyed the cave with regal assessment, amber eyes taking in the strangers before focusing on Nathan. And Rebecca. Jimmy spotted the wolf and reached instinctively for his pistol. "Wolf!" he shouted in alarm, raising his weapon. "No!" Nathan and Rebecca cried out in unison, but their warning came too late. The pistol discharged with a deafening crack in the confined space of the cave, the sound reverberating off stone walls. Ghost moved with impossible speed, the bullet striking the stone where he had stood a heartbeat before. The silver wolf disappeared back into the night as quickly as he had appeared. Nathan moved with cold fury, crossing the distance to Jimmy in 3 long strides. Before the trapper could react, Nathan had disarmed him, twisting the pistol from his grip with practiced skill. "You fool," he said, voice deadly quiet as he examined the weapon before securing it in his own belt. That wolf wasn't attacking. He was assessing the storm's progress. Jimmy backed away, hands raised defensively. It was a damn wolf in the cave entrance. Any sane man would shoot. Any wise man would observe before acting. Rebecca countered, her own anger evident as she joined Nathan. "That wolf has saved both our lives during this storm. He's no ordinary predator." Peter struggled to sit up despite his injury. "Jimmy's right to be cautious, ma'am. Wolves are dangerous predators, especially in winter when game is scarce." "Not this one," Nathan stated with absolute certainty. "Ghost has never attacked humans, who respect the mountain's boundaries." "Ghost?" Jimmy repeated skeptically. "You named a wild wolf?" "He had that name before I arrived," Nathan replied, his posture gradually relaxing from its combat readiness, though his eyes remained alert. "Silver wolf, larger than natural, older than possible. Settlement folk speak of him in whispers. Trappers tell stories around fires." Recognition dawned in Peter's pain-lined face. The grey ghost, the wolf that can't be killed. He made a superstitious gesture. That's just a mountain legend. No wolf lives 20 years or grows to the size of a bear. Legend often contains truth, Rebecca found herself saying, echoing Nathan's earlier words. I've seen Ghost with my own eyes, watched him communicate with Mr. Holt. He helped save me from the storm's path. Her defense of Ghost surprised even herself, yet the words felt right as she spoke them. In the past days, her understanding of the mountain and its inhabitants had shifted fundamentally, revealing patterns and relationships invisible to those who viewed the wilderness only as resources to be exploited. Jimmy looked between them, doubt clear in his expression. You both sound touched by mountain madness. Wolves don't save people, they hunt them when hungry enough. Your ignorance is exceeded only by your poor judgment, Nathan replied coldly, turning toward the cave entrance. Stay here. Keep your friend warm. I'll find Ghost. Ensure your foolishness didn't wound him. As Nathan moved toward the exit, Rebecca made a swift decision. I'm coming with you, she said, already reaching for her coat. Nathan paused, studying her with that penetrating gaze. After a moment, he nodded once, acceptance of her choice and acknowledgement of her right to make it. You can't seriously be going out in a blizzard to look for a wolf, Jimmy protested. It's madness! Rebecca turned at the cave entrance, her expression resolute. The real madness is firing blindly at something you don't understand. Stay with your friend, Mr. Richardson. We'll return when we've found Ghost. As they stepped into the swirling snow, leaving the warmth of the fire behind, Rebecca felt no fear despite the obvious dangers. Something had changed within her during this mountain ordeal, a reawakening of instincts long suppressed by civilizations. Constraints, a recognition of patterns that spoke to something deeper than rational thought. The night enfolded them, dark and dangerous, yet alive with meaning for those who had learned to listen. Nathan moved with quiet certainty through the storm, and Rebecca followed, trusting not just the man, but the mountain that had brought them together under such extraordinary circumstances. The night had transformed the mountain into a realm of shadows and whispers. Snow continued to fall, though less violently than before, creating a muffled landscape where sound traveled strangely. Some noises carried for impossible distances, while others were swallowed by the white silence. Rebecca followed Nathan through this altered world, trusting his instinctive understanding of the terrain, even when her own senses became disoriented by the uniform whiteness surrounding them. They moved upslope from the lower cave, following tracks only Nathan could discern beneath the fresh snowfall. A doet had joined them without prompting, the wolf dog ranging ahead and then circling back, communicating through subtle movements that Rebecca was beginning to understand as clearly as spoken words. Ghost is injured, Nathan said after studying a doet's behavior during one such return. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone reading obvious signs rather than guessing. Rebecca's heart sank. How badly? Not fatally. Bullet grazed his flank. Nathan adjusted their course slightly, heading toward a dense stand of pines ahead. He seeking shelter to assess his own wound. The matter-of-fact way Nathan spoke of the wolf's reasoning struck Rebecca not as strange, but as entirely sensible. After what she'd witnessed these past days, Ghost's intelligence and calculated decisions seemed as natural as the storm itself. Will he let us approach if he's wounded? She asked, practical concern overriding theoretical questions. Nathan's expression remained focused on their path. He'll allow me. You. He glanced at her briefly. That depends on the ghost. They entered the pine grove, where interlocked branches had created a sheltered space with significantly less snow accumulation. The ground here was covered with fallen needles rather than deep drifts, making movement easier but also more audible. Nathan slowed their pace, his gestures indicating the need for quiet as they approached a fallen log that created a natural windbreak within the grove. Rebecca saw him first, the massive silver form of Ghost lying in the sheltered space behind. The log, his amber eyes watching their approach with alert intelligence. Even wounded, the wolf maintained his regal bearing, head raised and posture indicating readiness to flee or fight if necessary. Nathan stopped at a respectful distance, making the low vocalizations Rebecca had heard him use before. Ghost's ears flicked forward, acknowledging the communication but not yielding his guarded position. A dark stain marred his silver coat just above his left flank, the bullet wound still seeping blood, though not heavily enough to indicate a serious injury. "Stay here," Nathan instructed Rebecca softly. "Let him decide whether to accept help." She nodded, remaining motionless as Nathan slowly approached the wounded wolf, his body language conveying respect rather than threat. Ghost watched him come, ears tracking every movement, but allowed Nathan to kneel beside him and gently examine the wound. "Clean graze," Nathan reported after a careful assessment. "Painful, but not deep. Bleeding's already slowing." Rebecca released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Will he allow me to help? I have some cloth in my pocket that could bind it." Nathan glanced at Ghost, a silent communication passing between them. After a moment, he nodded. "Approach, slowly, no sudden movements. Let him smell your hand before touching him." Heart pounding with the extraordinary nature of the moment, Rebecca stepped carefully forward, Ghost's amber eyes fixed on her, unblinking and assessing. She remembered their first encounter on the trail, how the massive wolf had deliberately herded her away from danger rather than treating her as prey. That memory gave her courage as she slowly extended her hand, palm down, for the wolf to inspect. Ghost leaned forward slightly, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. Then, to Rebecca's amazement, he deliberately pressed his muzzle against her fingers, a gesture of acceptance that seemed impossibly knowing for a wild animal. "He remembers you saved him from the trapper's second shot," Nathan observed quietly. "Recognizes you chose his safety over shelter." Rebecca knelt beside Nathan, carefully removing the clean cloth from her pocket. With gentle movements, she helped. Nathan bind the wound, Ghost remaining perfectly still throughout the process, despite what must have been considerable pain. "I've never experienced anything like this," she whispered, overwhelmed by the moment's significance. "It's like he understands everything." "He understands more than most humans give credit," Nathan replied, "not in words, but in intentions and consequences." When the binding was secure, Ghost rose smoothly to his feet, testing the bandage with a slight movement of his injured flank. Apparently satisfied, he regarded them both with that uncanny intelligence before padding silently toward the edge of the pine grove. "He's leaving?" Rebecca asked, surprised by the swift departure. Nathan shook his head. "Leading. He wants us to follow." Without questioning how Nathan knew this, Rebecca gathered herself to continue their journey. The brief rest in the sheltered grove had restored some of her energy, and curiosity about Ghost's intentions overrode her awareness of the cold and fatigue. They followed the silver wolf along a path that curved around the mountainside rather than returning directly to either cave. Ghost moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure they maintained contact through the swirling snow. After nearly half an hour of travel, the terrain began to look familiar to Rebecca. They were approaching the location where she had first encountered Nathan and the wolves, where her wagon had been left beside the fallen tree. "He's bringing us back to your wagon," Nathan confirmed, reading her recognition. "But why now, in darkness?" Ghost had stopped ahead, his silver coat visible against the dark outline of Rebecca's abandoned wagon. As they approached, Rebecca noticed something different. The fallen tree that had blocked the trail had been partially cleared, with a passage now wide enough for the wagon to navigate with careful handling. "The path is clear," she observed with surprise. "But how?" That tree was massive. Nathan studied the scene with narrowed eyes. Not cleared by human hands. Look at the break patterns. That's avalanche damage. The recent slides must have shifted. This section of the mountain, the implications weren't lost on Rebecca. Meaning we could potentially recover the wagon and continue to Fort Harrison once the storm fully passes? Potentially, Nathan agreed, though his tone held reservation. Depends on conditions elsewhere on the trail. One cleared obstacle doesn't mean the entire path is safe. Ghost watched them from beside the wagon, his posture suggesting expectation, as if he had deliberately brought them to witness this development. When Nathan approached to examine the wagon's condition more closely, the wolf moved to intercept him, directing his attention instead to the cargo area covered by Rebecca's tarp. "He wants us to check your goods," Nathan interpreted, following Ghost's guidance. Together, they removed the ice-crusted tarp, revealing Rebecca's trade goods largely intact despite the storm's fury. However, partially buried beneath fresh snow at the wagon's edge lay something that hadn't been there before. A man's bag, constructed of poor-quality leather with a distinctive brass buckle. Nathan lifted it carefully, examining the buckle, with recognition. "This belongs to one of the trappers. See this marking? Standard issue for Hudson Bay Company novices." Rebecca's mind raced through the implications. They were here before we found them. They discovered my wagon, and instead of securing it or noting its location to help the owner, they searched it for valuables, Nathan finished, opening the bag to reveal several small items clearly taken from Rebecca's trade goods. Carved bone buttons, a packet of valuable tea, and a small silver pendant clearly meant for trade with indigenous tribes. The realization hit Rebecca with unexpected force. While she lay sleeping safely in Nathan's cave, these men had been pillaging her hard-earned trade goods, not from desperate need, but from simple opportunism. "They lied to us," she said, anger building as she recognized the broader implications. "The story about Peter's injury, likely true but incomplete," Nathan assessed, his expression hardening. "The trap probably caught him, but they were already up here, setting lines illegally in territory they know belongs to others." "How can you be certain?" Nathan gestured toward the far side of the clearing. "Their tracks from before the heavy snow. They circled this area extensively, laid traps in a pattern that violates standard mountain etiquette. No responsible trapper sets lines blocking game trails or near water sources used by multiple species. These men weren't just inexperienced. They were deliberately exploitative. The evidence was difficult to dispute, yet something still puzzled Rebecca. But why would Ghost want us to discover this now? What purpose does it serve when we've already offered them shelter and medical care? Nathan's expression changed, understanding dawning in his features. "Because he's warning us. These aren't simply foolish tenderfeet. They're deliberately destructive, and once Peter's leg improves enough for travel, they might not simply leave with gratitude," Rebecca finished, the strategic implications becoming clear. "They've already demonstrated they'll take what isn't theirs. Your cave, your supplies. Ghost is protecting the mountain's balance, as he always has," Nathan said quietly, "including those who respect that balance." The silver wolf watched them with steady amber eyes, the intelligence behind them now undeniable to Rebecca. This was no mere animal, but a conscious guardian of the wilderness who had made calculated decisions at every turn, from herding her away from danger to revealing the trapper's true nature before it threatened Nathan's sanctuary. "We need to return to the cave," Rebecca decided, securing the bag of stolen items as evidence. "Deal with this situation before it escalates further." Nathan nodded agreement, but as they prepared to depart, Ghost unexpectedly moved to block their path. The wolf stood directly before Rebecca, his massive body preventing her from following the route back to the lower cave. He doesn't want us returning there, Nathan interpreted, studying Ghost's behavior with focused attention. Not yet. Then where? Rebecca began before understanding struck her. Your cave. He wants us to go to your main dwelling instead. Nathan considered this, trust in Ghost's judgment evident in his expression. Safer position, multiple exits if needed, and the trappers don't know of its existence. The strategic advantage was obvious. From Nathan's primary cave, they could observe and plan without the trappers' knowledge, approaching the situation from a position of greater security. Lead the way, Rebecca agreed, looking to Ghost with newfound respect. The journey back through the storm-transformed landscape took longer than their initial descent, the terrain growing increasingly challenging as they climbed. Rebecca found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't realized she possessed, her determination fueled by the need to address the potential threat the trappers represented. When they finally reached the hidden entrance to Nathan's cave, Rebecca experienced an unexpected sensation, the feeling of returning to safety, to something approaching home. The familiar narrow passage welcomed them with its promise of warmth and security, a stark contrast to the icy wilderness beyond. Inside, Chetan and Maska greeted them with subdued enthusiasm, clearly sensing the serious nature of their return. The fire had burned low, but remained viable, quickly restored to warming strength by Nathan's practiced hand. Ghost entered last, shaking snow from his coat before settling near the passage entrance, his posture that of a sentry taking up watch. Warmth returned to her extremities. Rebecca organized her thoughts about their situation. We need a plan for when we return to the lower cave, she said, practicality overriding fatigue. The trappers don't know we've discovered their theft. Nathan nodded, adding more wood to the rejuvenated fire. Gives us an advantage. I need to secure my supplies there before confronting them. Limit their access to resources if the situation turns hostile. You think it might come to violence? Rebecca asked, though she already suspected the answer. Men who steal when assisted rarely. Show gratitude when confronted, Nathan replied simply. But addressing them directly prevents greater trouble later. Otherwise, they might return with others once spring arrives. The logic was sound. Better to handle the potential threat now, contained and predictable, than allow it to grow into something more dangerous later. Rebecca had seen similar situations play out in Clearwater Settlement, where leniency toward minor infractions often emboldened troublemakers to attempt more significant transgressions. We'll go at first light, she decided. Present the evidence, retrieve my supplies, and make our expectations clear. Nathan studied her with new appreciation. You've handled such situations before. Rebecca smiled grimly. A woman alone on the frontier learns to address problems directly before they fester. Showing weakness only invites exploitation. For the first time since they'd met, Nathan's expression shifted into what might have been a genuine smile, brief but transformative of his weathered features. The mountain chose well when it placed you in Ghost's path. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, acknowledgement of something that had been building between them through this shared ordeal, mutual respect that transcended conventional frontier relationships. They spent the remaining hours planning their approach, sharing tactics with the ease of longtime partners rather than recent acquaintances. Throughout their discussion, Rebecca found herself increasingly reluctant to contemplate her eventual return to Clearwater Settlement. The confines of frontier society, with its rigid expectations, particularly for women, seemed impossibly restrictive after experiencing the raw authenticity of the mountain wilderness. As dawn approached, bringing with it a temporary lull in the storm, Rebecca made a decision that had been forming in her mind since Ghost had first led the wolves to intervene in her journey. After we've dealt with the trappers and the weather clears enough for travel, she said carefully, I don't think I'll be returning to Clearwater permanently." Nathan looked up from the arrows he was preparing, his blue eyes holding neither surprise nor judgment. "The settlement is your home." "It's where I've lived," Rebecca corrected. "But this mountain has shown me something different, a kind of freedom I've been seeking without fully understanding what I was looking for." "Mountains demand much from those who choose them," Nathan observed, though his tone held no discouragement. "Winter is harsh. Isolation tests even the strongest spirit." "I'm not proposing to live exactly as you do," Rebecca clarified. "But perhaps there's a middle path, a trading post at the mountain's edge, serving as a connection between wilderness and settlement without fully belonging to either world." The idea had crystallized during their ordeal, a vision of establishing a place where different worlds could meet on equal terms, where the wisdom of the mountain could be translated for those still bound to civilization's constraints. "Fort Harrison has needed a reliable outpost on this side of the range for years," she continued, warming to the concept. "With my connections there and in Clearwater, plus my wagon trade routes already established." Nathan considered her words, with characteristic thoroughness, neither dismissing nor immediately embracing the proposal. "Such a place would need protection," he finally observed. "The wrong sort of attention could disrupt the mountain's balance." "Which is why it would need people who understand both worlds," Rebecca replied. "Someone who values the wilderness for itself, not merely for what can be taken from it." Their eyes met across the fire, unspoken understanding passing between them. This wasn't a romantic overture in the conventional sense, but something more fundamental. Recognition of kindred spirits who had found in each other complementary strengths and shared values. Ghost raised his massive head from where he had been resting, amber eyes reflecting the firelight, as he regarded them both with what seemed remarkably like approval. The great wolf had brought them together through what appeared to be chance, but increasingly felt like purpose. The mountain's wisdom working through its most ancient guardian. As dawn's first light began filtering through the cave's hidden ventilation channels, Rebecca and Nathan prepared to face the challenges immediately before them, confronting the trappers, recovering her wagon, and navigating the storm-transformed landscape. Yet beneath these practical concerns lay something more profound, the foundation of a new path neither had anticipated when the winter storm first approached Whispering Pine Valley. The wilderness had tested them both, separately and together, and in that testing had revealed possibilities beyond the conventional boundaries of frontier existence. Whatever came next would be neither fully wild nor entirely civilized, but something new, a bridge between worlds that honored the wisdom of the mountain while offering sanctuary to those who sought to understand its deeper truths. Rebecca. Walker had set out from Clearwater Settlement, seeking only supplies, before winter's grip closed the mountain passes. Instead, she had found her true direction when wolves attacked her wagon and a silent mountain man appeared with his pack. Not an ending to her journey, but the beginning of a path she hadn't known she was seeking until the mountain showed her the way. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.